Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Food Literacy for All. Tonight we have Kristina Villa and Ian McSweeney joining us from the Farmers Land Trust and the Farmland Commons. My name is Julius Buzzard. I am one of the co-instructors here at Food Literacy for All, alongside Amanda Edmonds, who you will see shortly. Food Literacy All is also held together by so many folks and so many places throughout the community, including each of these logos that you see at the bottom of the screen. This is Sustainable Food Systems Initiative, Growing Hope, Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, Detroit Food Policy Council, DBCFSN, Program in the Environment, and SEES. A little bit more about who is making the magic happen here tonight and throughout this whole semester. If you've been with us, if this is whether this is your first Food Literacy for All, or if you've been with us all the way through, each of these people have been a part of it. Amanda Edmonds, who is the faculty co-instructor, who I mentioned already, myself, Taylor Jolene, the GSI, who's here tonight, Sammy, the course coordinator, who you will also hear from later tonight. And we also have with us Marissa, who's supporting with tech. We have a couple of announcements to start the evening off tonight. The Sustainable Food Systems Initiative Fall 2026 course guide is live. So you can scan this QR code or see the newsletter students for both graduate and undergraduate classes. There's over 50 food related courses. So if this gave you a little taste of what food systems work is about and you want to learn a bit more, take a look. There's a lot of really great options there. And then next week, we have fast food for thought. So we'll be talking about this a number of times tonight in all of our newsletters and things like that. Fast food for thought is a hybrid event. If you want to be there in person, please do RSVP. The link is in the chat. These are all of the speakers who will be there doing sort of mini talks on different topics with an opportunity to ask them some questions. And then there will also be some food there from Samosa House. If you do want to be there in person, please do RSVP. There's a limit on how many people can fit in the space. So if you do not RSVP, you will not be able to be there in person. And students, if you are planning to go, remember you can get extra credit for attending in person, but you need a seat to be able to get that extra credit. So join us next week in the Dana building, 6:30 to 8 p.m., same time as class. We'll have a short reception afterwards with some delicious samosas.
All right, so for this Zoom webinar, there's different ways that you can engage and interact. We have the chat button at the bottom of the screen, and you can use that for general comments, or if there's urgent tech issues you're having or you're resonating with what the speakers are saying. Make sure if you do comment in there and you do want everyone to see it, there's a button where you can change the to everyone. Otherwise, it'll just go to the hosts and panelists, which sometimes isn't as fun for knowing what you're thinking. And then there's also a Q&A button in the Zoom. So this is what we'll use towards the end once we have Q&A time with Ian and Kristina. So if you have specific questions that come up throughout their presentation, please put those in the Q&A area. Lastly, there are live transcript closed captions available. And next we have the student response. So each week, the graduate student instructor, Taylor, selects a student response, and this response comes from Jaden, who is a senior studying social theory and practice, which sounds like an awesome area to study. So Jaden's student response focuses on the readings that were previously assigned for a speaker we had planned, who is Kali Akuno, and he runs, help supports Cooperation Jackson, which is an organization based in Mississippi. Definitely recommend checking out more of their work if you have time. But Jaden has a really creative approach and reflecting on their own community. So we'll play that video here.
Hi everyone, my name is Jaden Opuni. I'm a second year student in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, and I'm studying social theory and practice. And I'm really curious the ways in which communities come to uplift one another. I love this reading in the way that the New African People's Organization and the Malcolm X grassroots movement sought to hasten the socialist transition and overall democracy of Jackson, Mississippi. Through these key components of seizing the means of production, ecologically regenerative forces, and the overall democratic transformation from bottom up work. So this made me think about my own community in Marion, Ohio. I often don't hear about the experiences of Black people in the community. And I'm curious how much of this is intentional, where we don't center the stories of the work that's done by the Black community, but more so the oppression faced by white people, centering the white perspective. So I'm curious, what what initiatives in your own community might you have not heard of intentionally?
Awesome. Thank you, Jaden, for that video. And that's a good segue to thinking about communities and connecting that with Farmland Commons and land trusts, which will be the focus of tonight's talk, and thinking about how those can be avenues for uplifting communities or building connections. So before we get into the speakers, we have a question of the week, which I'll launch here on Zoom. And this is for everyone to respond to, community members and students. There's no iClicker for this. This question is just gauging where you're coming from. There's no right or wrong answer. How familiar are you with alternative farmland ownership models like land trusts or commons-based approaches? Very familiar. I've worked with or studied them. Somewhat familiar. I've heard of them but don't know much, or not familiar at all. So I'll give a few more seconds for you all to share what you might know about land trusts or common-based approaches. Okay, so it looks like about we have 140 responses, and about 43% are saying I've heard of them but don't know much. And 27%, the second highest response, is not familiar at all. So that leaves about 30% being somewhat familiar or very familiar. So thank you all for sharing. That's really helpful to know some of your background knowledge on that. All right, I'll pass it over to introductions.
All right, Ian. Sorry. Ian's work centers on strengthening the relationship between people and land through food and agriculture. Across his roles in social work, conservation-focused real estate, philanthropy, and land trust leadership, he has helped to develop innovative approaches to farmland ownership, stewardship, and access for next generation farmers. Over his career, Ian has worked with more than 100 land trust communities, supporting over 100 farms, protecting more than 12,000 acres of farmland, and raised over $24 million for agricultural land access and conservation. He's the co-founder and executive director of the Farmers Land Trust. And alongside Ian, we have Kristina joining us tonight. Kristina is the co-founder and co-executive director of the Farmers Land Trust and is a farmer, communicator, and community coordinator who believes that our connection to the soil is directly related to the health of our bodies, economy, and society. With over a decade in farming, communication, and fundraising experience, Kristina enjoys using her skill set to share photos, stories, and information in engaging ways, which helps to inspire change in human habits and mindsets causing the food system, climate, and overall well-being of the world to improve. Kristina has spent the last several years of her professional career saving farmland from development and securing it in nonprofit land holding structures that give farmers, stewards, and ranchers long-term affordable access and tenure to it. Most of her work in land access space is focused on equitable land security for BIPOC growers, addressing the inequities and disparities in how land is owned and accessed in this country. I've gotten to know Ian and Kristina personally over the past year or so. It's hard, time is relative, but they're both incredibly inspiring folks, and the work that they're doing is truly, I think, world changing. for the good of our planet, for the good of our food system. And I'm so glad that they are here tonight to share a little bit of what that is and hopefully get you all excited and involved. So I'll turn it over to them.
Wow, thank you so much, Julius. I'm so honored. We are so honored to get to be here. And thank you all, everyone involved, for this amazing webinar you have set up and for including us. We're all so excited and honored. So we'll go ahead and dive in. So we have plenty of time for question and answer and discussion. We are the Farmers Land Trust, and first we are going to introduce ourselves, and then we'll share more about the Farmers Land Trust, and then we'll dive into what the Farmland Commons model is, how it works, and then some examples happening around the country. So I'm Kristina, and I live in Middle Tennessee. My husband and I steward 70 acres of land, and we grow vegetables using organic and biodynamic methods. And we sell to restaurants, grocery stores, and also CSAs. We also have a herd of cows, about 25, and we do raw milk herd share and also beef shares. And really, we try to raise and grow and can and freeze and ferment and dry and eat as much of our food as possible. And we did not come from farming backgrounds or landed families. And so I really come to this work from being a young farmer who knew how to grow food, who had the skills, who had the grit it takes, but could not access or afford land and struggled with insecurity on land, unfair power dynamics with landowners. And at that same time, I also knew and loved so many aging, retiring farmers who were struggling with how to transition their farmland and also their farm business and also the communities and markets that they had built. And I really saw the need for developing structures and supporting both these young generation farmers who need land access, but also this aging, retiring population who needed new ways to transition their farm business. And so that is what brings me here as co-executive director and co-founder of the Farmers Land Trust. And now I'll pass it to you, Ian.
Thanks, Kristina, and thank you everyone for being here. And really, congratulations on an amazing win. Recognizing also the heaviness of the moment we're in right now, local, the flooding you're experiencing, the global realities that we face. So thank you for tuning into this, attending, and really engaging in all the ways you do in your local community and in your learning journey. So I'm Ian McSweeney, as introduced. I grew up and family roots in Massachusetts. I've lived a little bit around the country. Southern New Hampshire is home for me, and where I live. And really, early on in my life, I saw the disconnect that we have with land and with each other. And I didn't know what I was going to do about it, but I knew I needed to do something. And so that's been my life journey. And as Julia introduced, in social work and in real estate and philanthropy and in nonprofit work, and really in the time in philanthropy when I was a director of this foundation supporting farmland ownership, transition, conservation work, was working on a individual project that really expanded my mind to understand that it's land, it's people, it's farmers, it's food, but it's also community. That community is needed to bridge that generational gap in so many times. So a strong connection to land is multi-generational, and it has to go beyond any individual person or any individual farm enterprise. So really that community can be the bridge from one generation to the next. The community can also be the support needed, because farming, land work, food production is and can be such a lonely endeavor for so many. And we see that locally in community, we see that around the world and the impact it has on people. So community is central to all our work. You'll hear about that now. And really that's what expanded my mind and really focused on this model that we're going to describe tonight, and really kind of continued to refine my work forward of how to bring together community how to transition farms all towards community food production, community equity in so many ways. So grateful to be here and to really engage all of you. We're going to start with a quiz. So would love to dive into a few questions. I will start it off. First question is, how many acres of U.S. farmland are expected to change hands by 2040? A, 100 million, B, 300 million, C, 500 million, D, 900 million acres. So in the next 14 years, how much farmland will transition?
And Ian, I have the results coming in here, so I'll sort of let you know once we hit kind of our standard number for students. The community members are taking the poll via Zoom, and then students are taking the poll through a different tool. Most students, there's kind of a relatively even split between B and C. So whenever you're ready, I think we can go on and you can give us the correct answer.
Great. So many of you were right, and others were very close to being right. Yeah, that approximately 300 million acres, and that's really based on the demographics of the age of farmland owners. And 300 million acres is almost 40% of the farmland in this whole country. So it's a massive transition of farmland that's underway. So really, that was a question we're asking you. Thank you for responding. But really, the take-home question for you to wrestle with, we'd suggest is, who will that land go to? Who will be the future owners? Who will be the future farmers? Who will have the opportunity to develop and retain relationship with that land? Next question. Question number 2. What is the most common path to land access today? A, inheriting land. B, buying land outright. C, leasing land. Or D, community ownership models.
So on the student side of things, we have a pretty even split between A, inheriting land, and C, leasing land. We'll give them maybe 5 more seconds here. All right, go ahead and tell us the correct answer.
Again, a number of you are right on with your answer. As we generationally have become disconnected with the land, there's less and less people who are inheriting land. And so leasing land is the primary way farmers have access to land. Leasing land is quite common. There's variations of types of leases, and we'll get into that in our presentation. And again, the question to leave with is, if leasing is going to be the most common and is the most common now, who will farmers, who will land workers, who will stewards lease from? Because that really will define what is possible for equity and security and tenure on the land. Back to you,
Great.
Kristina.
Thanks. Yeah. And I thought the question of the week from the other hosts and panel, that was so informative too and helpful in understanding where everyone is at with what we're about to talk about today. So these are so great. So our question number 3 is, when farmland becomes unaffordable, what is most at risk? Is it local food systems, community, soil health, or all of the above?
All right, we have a pretty unanimous D on the student side of things.
Okay, well, in all fairness, this was an easy one. Yes, definitely all of the above. But really, I think the important thing here is that we all recognize that when land becomes unaffordable, there is a lot at risk. And therefore, it's very important that we do something right now to make sure that the trajectory that we are on does not remain the trajectory that becomes our future. So last poll question is, what is the average age of a land donor in our network? Is that 35, 65, 88, or there isn't one? 88, or if 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 there isn't one? 88,
All right, most students are guessing B, and then the second place choice is C, 88.
Those are very good guesses. And also, this was a trick question because obviously we could have added them all up and done the math to find an actual average, but actually we're saying there isn't one because we have land donors as young as 28 and up to the age of 89. And I think that the important thing to really realize here is that this is not an end of life decision. I think that we all think about estate planning and donating land is something that happens when you think that you are coming to the end of your life, but that's not true. We can all make different choices, whatever age we are, with the resources that we have. And that is a very empowering thing that I want everyone to hold now and into the future and every day from here on out. All right, so diving into our actual presentation now. Thank you all for that. So, to set the stage for why it is that we are doing what we're doing, it's because although we find ourselves in the moment of multiple points of crisis, there is a crisis around farmers and farmland that we think about every day, that we face every day, and that we really wanted to do something about. So, the average age of farmers is increasing all the time. The average age of farmers is over 75. Farmland value is completely out of touch with reality. Farmland prices appreciate by over 40% per decade, meaning that the people who have access to land and who can afford land are not the people who are growing food for their communities. Every single day, 37 mid-sized farms are closing, and farmers have among the highest suicide rates. Farmland ownership is completely unjust. 98% of land in this country is owned by white people, and that, no matter how you look at it, that's not right. So we have a lot of issues going on around farmland ownership, farmland access, farmland succession, farmland transition, and stewardship of land. And we need something to address all of these points and something that can be replicable and scalable and something that allows everyone anywhere to get involved and do something about it.
So, as many of you may have heard or kind of recognize, in a crisis is also opportunity, right? And so the questions we posed to start with were to kind of bring forward the realities of that opportunity. We're in the largest private land ownership transition this country has ever experienced. So with that transition, farmland is moving from present ownership into something new. There's an opportunity to define what is new. And so that's where we step into this work as the Farmers Land Trust. We're a national 501c3 land trust, and we have certain values, and we have a belief that what is needed is new models to meet the opportunity of farmland in transition. So we have certain values that are illustrated here on this slide and will also kind of expand on further in this presentation. But in a bigger picture, we're trying to bring forward a model and values as a solution to how farmland can be owned, how tenure, equity, and security can be conveyed. And so we've created this work to address that. This work we've created really takes learning from existing land trust culture. So that gets at that initial question of people's understanding of things. And we wanted to give a brief snapshot of kind of land trust, both conservation land trust and community land trust history, just to ground people a little bit in the context. We're happy to answer questions or follow up emails or share more resources. There's a lot on conservation and community land trust. But just as a snapshot, conservation land trust started in this country in the late 1890s in Massachusetts with the trustees for reservations. They have focused from the start on holding land for natural resources, open space, agricultural land, built housing, built community spaces, and continue to do that today. There's well over 3,000 land trusts now, conservation land trusts around the country. A number of those land trusts are part of this Land Trust Alliance. That's a great place to learn more about all this, get resources, context, and a lot of information on conservation land trusts. Conservation land trusts then grew around the country. After Massachusetts, the second was in New Hampshire. And then really the biggest growth in conservation land trust work happened late 1970s, early 1980s as the conservation easements became a tool. And there's a lot more context to that, but what a conservation easement is it's certain rights of land, of real estate, but not all the rights. So it's not the ownership rights, but it's development rights. And certain rights are removed from the land to protect the land. And with conservation easements coming to be, again, first in Massachusetts and then federally through the IRS, there's a huge increase in number of conservation land trusts, acres conserved with conservation land trusts through the use of a conservation easement. And that is a primary tool that is used by conservation land trusts, but not exclusively. So they own land, they own conservation easements, they own other ways of protecting land, most of the time for natural resource, habitat, open space values.
So the other type of typical land trust that we're just going to touch on is the community land trust. And so the community land trusts were first created with the very first community land trust in 1969, which was in southern Georgia, and it was named the New Communities Land Trust. And really, this was an act of Black liberation where this community understood that to have security in their homes and businesses and also their food, that they needed to own it collectively and that they needed to own it as a community resource, not as private property. And so this was really focused on agriculture as its founding starting. But the community land trust model has grown and expanded and evolved to now be focused more on housing and infrastructure and the built environment. And so when we think about community land trusts and how they typically work, they are very often hyper local, which is so fabulous because it's giving the people who live and work there the voice in that community ownership. And the way it operates is with a tool called a ground lease. And so what this means is that the community land trust owns the land, and then an individual owns their home or the building on top of that land. And so it's a way for individuals to build equity in ownership while also maintaining a cap on affordability. So thinking about how to keep homes and buildings affordable and also as a community resource is how the community land trust operates. And before either of those models, a conservation land trust or a community land trust, Indigenous groups have been holding land in community and as commons for much longer than this word has even been part of our vernacular. And so we pulled this quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass because it very much speaks to land being held as common, land being held as a resource before we put all of these fictitious papers and bureaucracies and layered them on top of land and held them at the courthouse and filing cabinets and said somebody owned them. And we share all of that to now get to this new kind of land trust. And really, we've taken what we think is the very best parts of both the conservation land trust and the community land trust and really embedded those ethos around holding land in community to create this commons land trust. And so now we are going to share with you all about the Farmland Commons model.
So the Farmland Commons model, there's a number of reasons why we use this model, why we created this, and why we provide it as an open resource and support and encourage anyone else to learn about and use this model in the way that works for them and their community. A lot of it has to do with the kind of values stated here, and more directly, almost all of those land trusts, conservation and community land trusts described, they're they're a single central organization where there's one board and they make decisions on the land, and they might work locally, more so in the community land trust. They might work locally to nationally and everything in between, like the conservation land trust, but really their decision making, the equity, the kind of autonomy to operate is all determined by the one central organization. And we don't feel that's just. We also don't feel that's a structure that is durable in the long term or something that is collaborative in building a cultural movement. So the Farmland Commons for us looks at kind of two levels of collaboration that are really important that I'd like to highlight here. One is that, as I shared in my introduction, like all of this work for us requires people, community, and land. We can't separate and just focus on one. So any project we're doing requires, a deep engagement with and exploration and building relationship and trust with each one of these people, community, and land. And so that's part of it, that understanding that it's broader than just one. And so that collaboration is important. The other part of the collaboration is the structure itself. So the 501c25 that uses a variety of agreements brings together multiple organizations. So 3 to 35 nonprofits come together and have equal authority, equal governance, equal equity in the structure that they co-create. So the 501c25 only exists when it's co-created by 3 or up to 35 nonprofits. And so that collaboration component is really important to us for, that durability, the long-term sustainability, and really a more just structure where many cases will describe we're one of those 501c3s, but in other cases we're not. And really it ensures that there's several organizations collaborating in something, and it honors many nonprofits that already exist and are doing amazing work, honors them that through collaboration they can do more. Through collaboration they can hold land in a more secure, durable shared way, and through collaboration that they can invite in other participants, other nonprofits that might be local to community, that might be, not local at all, but having some experience, knowledge, shared value, or something else. So that's those two pieces of the structure of collaboration are really important to us. And, it's very complex. It takes a lot of agreements and structural framework to make that possible. But that's kind of baked into the identity of this Farmland Commons. As an alternative, another avenue that is more streamlined, that is less collaborative, is this 501c2 structure where one 501c3 organization can create a 501c2 connected to it. And sometimes that makes great sense. That doesn't make great sense for us. Like, we're not local to communities. And so we're connecting and collaborating with local communities, but we can't pretend that we're the relationship holders or the community relations. And the community is central to our work. So that collaboration is important. But for, a single nonprofit 501c3 that has a strong presence in community, the 501c2 could be a great model for them, and might be the perfect fit. And that's, we elevate that because both are important to consider. Back to you, Kristina.
So in both of these structures, the Farmers Land Trust could be one of the 501c3 nonprofits involved, but doesn't have to be. And I think that this is a really important thing to note, because the Farmers Land Trust is trying to make sure that this is all open resource and that anyone anywhere can use it, and that it can become a movement and a new way of being in relationship with land and not needing to directly be tied to us as a national organization. And so there are many reasons to utilize these structures. One of them is that it helps to limit liability for land holdings. But another is that it allows nonprofits to be involved in supporting land access, land transition, farmland succession in a different way than their mission or their organization would have had ability or capacity to otherwise. So it lets them be connected to and part of something that they know is important and that they want to be supportive of, but that they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do on their own. So the Farmland Commons is created with 3 or more nonprofits coming together to create this sub-entity, and then this sub-entity then has its own board of people. So this is local to place, like a community land trust, but in the cases where the Farmers Land Trust or other national nonprofits are connected to it, it then has a network that's connected to broader people and resources than just a single local community would have. So this Farmland Commons has its own board of people who are local to place, and then it functions and operates doing only the things listed here. So the board members are all appointed by those member organizations and are typically technical assistance providers or people who are supportive of that farm and community, but it always has on the board that farmer leaseholder of the land. And that is a really important part of the structure because the farmer themselves are not just receiving the lease, but they're also part of creating those lease terms, because that is one of the jobs and responsibilities of the board, is to convey lease out to farmer. They also are responsible for collecting any revenue from that lease, which in this case of the Farmland Commons is typically the cost of taxes, insurance, and also a voluntary indigenous land tax to the communities who has ties to that land. This board on the Farmland Commons is where the deed is held, and then they are supporting ecosystem and land health and stewardship and management, not by directly being involved in that on the land, but through management of the lease and farm management plan. And so the land itself gets into a Farmland Commons by going first from private ownership, which is where most land is typically held, and then it is either donated or given at a discounted sale to one of the parent 501c3s who are part of that Farmland Commons. And then the deed flows from the 501c3 into that Farmland Commons where it is held. And then that is where that long-term affordable tenure is given through this 99-year lease to the farmer. And that farmer could either be an individual, it could be an LLC, or it could be one of the nonprofits who are one of the parent entities. It could be a cooperative. It can be any legal entity. So this model is very adaptable and flexible to place, but also how it engages with other legal entities and structures. Another important thing to note is that all existing zoning and permitting laws, ordinances, deed restrictions, any other conservation easements, or anything else already part of that deed and land still apply. So this Farmland Common structure does not remove those from the land. It's just adding this to that land. And so that 99-year lease then is given to whatever that entity is who is farming, whether it's an individual who's running their own farming business or it's another nonprofit who's then running a farm incubator. And, you know, we've done projects with all sorts of examples of this, but this 99-year lease then speaks to the conservation and stewardship practices that are principles and values of ours as the Farmers Land Trust. So chemical-free, organic, biodynamic, regenerative practices. And also it has equity building components. So similar to that ground lease that we discussed previously, the farmer steward, rancher, the lesser of this land, can own any housing and infrastructure or improvements that they themselves build or invest in on the land. And then this lease can be passed on to next generation. So we have examples of individuals with 99-year lease, and their children will then inherit this. And this is generational wealth in a different form, and it's giving many rights and equity to this farmer than a typical land transition or a typical lease really would. And when I say equity, I'm going to say I mean that in multiple ways. So there's the equity of money that can be cashed out later, but there's also equity and fairness and justness that's happening here because this leaseholder, as mentioned, is on the board. So they're part of the power structure, but they also are gaining so much support and power through this lease. So there are several things that give the farmer here more power in this situation, including that they get an affirmative vote on the board. So not only are they on the board, but they have a super vote, meaning that nothing can be passed without their saying it can and voting in favor of. They're also now getting support of community members and a full board of people that they wouldn't have had if they were owning real estate on their own. So there's a lot to this lease that make it really unique and special. And an additional insurance is that this lease is then recorded with the deed. So it's not just a handshake agreement between two entities, but it's really a stamp on the deed saying, this is your lease, this is your security, and this is a way to use a legal tool to give that farmer everything that they would want out of ownership other than the ability to sell the land in the future. And I think that that's a very important point to drive home because in our westernized culture, we think about if you want autonomy and independence on land, you have to own it. But there are other ways. And in this country, when we've separated and parceled out rights to land in so many ways, it's really helpful to be able to understand how can we do that for good? How can we take all of these legal tools and all these abilities to use them in a way that gives farmers long-term secure tenure on land without the burden of debt and without any of the other issues that we're seeing farmers face today. Sorry, I can't see the bottom of the screen right now. Is this my slide too?
Still yours, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
hidden in the radishes.
Okay, I couldn't see my initial. Oh, now I see it. Okay, thank you. So this is distinctly different than a typical nonprofit holding title to land and leasing it out to a farmer in several ways. And we're bringing up this distinction because there are many nonprofits around the country who own land and then lease them out to a farmer, and many individuals who own land and lease it out to a farmer. But those power dynamics are typically not equal or fair. There's no equity building components, and there are many other layers and aspects to this that make that unfair. So one of the reasons that this is distinctly different than a nonprofit holding title to land is the leaseholder sitting on the board, giving them decision-making power. Also, this is not a top-down model. This is not us as a white-led national organization telling local people to that land what they should do and how they should do it. Instead, the board is of that local community. And then this legal structure of a 501c25 brings in more collaborative partners so that it's equal power sharing, equal land owning in ways that, for instance, different nonprofits get to come together to equally hold this land. And so you're inviting in a different layer of collaboration that's more deep than just leasing out land. The actual structure itself, also being a limited scope landholding entity, means that the board and the nonprofits involved are not legally allowed to interfere with the day-to-day operations on the farm. So this is a firewall that gives that leaseholder all of the independence and autonomy that they want out of land ownership. They're the ones who manage and maintain and operate the day-to-day. They just have this lease that ensures that they're doing active agriculture.
So, and really just to kind of frame that position of the leaseholder, and we're naming it as a farmer, but it could be the resident in a home, it could be the steward or the rancher, as we said, it could be the land worker. It's simplified just to say the farmer in our presentation, but it's whoever's holding that lease. And really that, as we reiterated, that structure, the nonprofit, is this limited scope entity. So it's holding the ownership of the land, the real estate, but it can't engage in the operation. So it's not involving itself, and it cannot in the farm business. So the farmer, the leaseholder, has autonomy in that business side. And yet it's a nonprofit, that Farmland Commons, so it's governed by a board. And the farmer being part of that board gives the farmer a voice and a seat at the table. And then really the last thing I just highlight from the beginning that I named was that farming can be and is for so many a lonely endeavor. And so we don't think the answer to that is joining a board and sitting on a board or multiple boards. Many farmers don't have the time to volunteer and engage in many other things. So how can their seat and their role on the board of this nonprofit be meaningful? It allows, one, building relationship with other farmers. Like these Farmland Commons are set up to hold multiple farms in a food shed region. So each farmer or leaseholder being connected on the board, they can build relationships. They're no longer alone. And these Farmland Commons having certain values baked in, the leaseholders are going to be attracted to this model, engage in the model because of similar values. So it's bringing together people with aligned values that then can build and hold relationship. And then it's also providing those farmers, leaseholders, the opportunity to collaborate on their business side. Like they're not doing that in this structure, the Farmland Commons, because of the limited nature of it, but they can do it leaseholder to leaseholder, farmer to farmer, and really, the ability for mid-size and small farms to collaborate and share relationship, knowledge, share equipment, share resources is essential for those mid-sized farms that were losing 37 a day. Like, the stats are that one has closed while we're on this presentation, right? So we need to build both that land security for them and remove those financial barriers around land, but we need to build pathways for collaboration on the business side, pathways for relationship building. So this really provides those opportunities in many ways. And then this, just as we close out the broad discussion of this Farmland Commons as a model, we put this illustration up here, and this illustration's on our website, and each of these black dots on our website have template documents and resources. So, go to our website and look. There's a lot of open source resources on this model, down to the agreements and structures and more that we've discussed. So that's one component. This is a place to find a lot of resources and content on our website, in addition to the template page. The other reason for this is really to depict that the work we do is a long and winding path that, might in the best day look like this. In reality is more of a corkscrew that hopefully we're going in the right direction at all times, but in reality we're not, right? It's a long kind of meandering path. And it takes all these steps. It's not just the land. As I said to begin with, it people, community, and land are each part of it. So because of those three components, relationships and shared agreements are essential, and they're the foundation for much of this. And then there's the transactional and transition parts of land and lease conveyance, and they are also part of it. And we enter these projects, these Farmland Commons, at different points along the road, but we cannot ignore any aspect of this. So sometimes we're first connecting with a landowner who's ready for that transaction, but we need to address the other pieces of this. Sometimes it's community that have those relationships and are looking for everything else. And so where we start differs, but the work we need to do and the path we need to take is very similar. And this depicts the bigger picture of it.
And so this is all open resource, and I really want to drive this home because we mean many different things when we say this. Yes, all of the legal templates needed to create a Farmland Commons and that are used in creating the Farmland Commons model are available as open resource legal templates on our website. Yes, absolutely. So that means you could go to the website, you and your community members could create a Farmland Commons on your own without ever talking to us, and we would applaud you and be your biggest cheerleaders. This also means, though, that you could use just pieces of it. So maybe you are a farmer or you are a landowner and you are looking to enter into a lease, but you want one that is more equitable and stewardship and also community focused. And so you just want to use the lease template, and that's great. And you can totally do that. You can download just the lease template and delete things, add things, take things out to make it very unique to you, but also to maintain that ethos and have all those creative things that we've worked in with teams of attorneys around the country, and also nonprofit leaders and farmers and landowners and everything in between. Another thing that we mean when we say that this is all open resource is that the actual living examples that communities around the country are using, that are signed, that are agreements, that are in practice right now, can be read and seen and poked at, and you can take it all apart and you can see what works for you and what doesn't, and you can see how they changed their version from the template to be unique to them in their place and their situation. And to be able to see something in practice like that is so valuable. To be able to see how people picked up a template and then remodeled it to fit them and their needs is so incredible and inspiring. And I really encourage you all to check out the Farmland Commons ecosystem page on our website and go to each one of these Farmland Commons, and that's how you can see which templates have been evolved and are in practice and available for you to view right now. And so, yeah, we have 7 of these Farmland Commons in various stages of development around the country at this moment, and they're all incredibly diverse and unique in every way possible. So obviously in geography around the country, but also in the people that they serve, the type of land that they're either seeking or utilizing, the type of farming practices, and also the type of nonprofits involved. So all of these are utilizing that 501c25 Farmland Commons structure. And we have examples of aging, retiring farmers who have spent over 50 years stewarding this land that they love, and they're donating their farm in to continue a very specific type of agriculture called biodynamic agriculture, as an example in Washington State. In Wisconsin, we have an example of this 28-year-old who donated his farm so that the very specific tree crop breeding that he's doing would not be lost if and when he dies, because the work that he's doing there with these tree crops is going to be something that no one sees into fruition until decades and decades from now. And he wants to make sure that the land is not just conserved, but that the work he's doing there continues. We have examples of farmers who are already growing food for their communities, who are already building soil but lack land security, who we're working with to build out this Farmland Commons and then do land searches to do outreach to landowners. We're utilizing GIS mapping, also community network conversations and partnerships to find suitable land to bring into these Farmland Commons for them. We have an example of an aging, retiring farmer who cannot afford to donate land because their retirement is tied to the land that they own, which is the case for most aging, retiring farmers. And so we're working on a crowdsourced fundraiser to raise the money needed to buy out this farmer, but at a very significantly and generously discounted sale price. So they're donating a portion of their land and only asking for a very fair, equitable exit from their land. And then we also have an example in Tennessee of multiple nonprofit community members who have already been working together for a long time, collaborating on projects and programs, and who are now utilizing this Farmland Commons model to create a Farmland Commons that will own land collectively among them. Some of this is land that they already own individually as nonprofits, and some of this is white generational land that has been held by families for multiple generations and is now being given as an act of reparations through this model. And in this case, the Farmers Land Trust is not one of the nonprofits involved. We're just helping support, guide, create this Farmland Commons in collaboration with them so that they can have this collaborative community land trust focused on agriculture and housing of their own that's also nationally supported. And then an example local to you all in Michigan.
Yeah, so the southwest part of the state, we are working on a Farmland Commons, the Earth and Heart Farmland Commons. Here's two of the lead partners in this, Julian and Alita. One is generational wealth, landowner and landowner, who is donating, has donated Farm In, and is long worked to build community through farming, food systems, and bringing people together, and has realized the limits of his own ability to carry that forward, and realizes that this structure, this collaborative structure, kind of builds that foundation in collaboration to then welcome in community in a much more equitable, balanced, and shared way. So Julian's donating Farms In, supporting the work in different ways. Alita Kelly has long been an activist and supporter of food production in the Grand Rapids area, in land access through National Young Farmers work, a lot of community work in growing food and advocating for food in schools, in community, in many different ways, and yet was an advocate for land security, for land justice, and is now directly experiencing it herself. She has a 99-year lease on a farm brought about through this model, and it's it's a lease, as we said, that generationally will be connected to her and her kin, and it allows community to come together. It's an existing farm with a large blueberry production field, a home, some barns and outbuildings, and really a lot of kind of developed stewardship on the ground, planted trees and bushes and trails and ponds and such. So this is kind of the start of something to come, something really beautiful to come in so many different ways. But this is an example of that land transition, leaseholder coming on, and now we're forming that Farmland Commons, the partnership of the nonprofit. So that path that I described, we started this instigated by a landowner who wanted to donate and initiate something more than himself and the work he had been doing. And through that and the land transition, we got connected with and brought about relationship with the leaseholder. And now we're building that structure of the Farmland Commons. And the structure will then be available to hold many more farm properties in the region as well. So it's a stepped approach. Each step is really intensive in the work and the kind of agreements and trust building needed, and so inspiring to just witness, to be part of, to see the transition that's happening there. So yeah, a really amazing project. There's a lot more on our website on this. I'd encourage everyone to take a look. But really, that's the end of our presentation. There's a lot more to share. We'd love to get to some questions, and also just an open invitation to go to our website, look at the resources we have, sign up for the newsletter, reach out with an email or phone call if you have questions, and really stay connected to this work. Find ways that it might fit into your community or that you'd like to learn more or that others you know might have an interest in this.
And follow us on your favorite social media.
Great. Thank you guys so much. And maybe Sammy, you could put their social media, look it up real quick and put it in the chat so people find it most easily. Thank you guys so much. So interesting. I'm happy, sad now that we have a big list of questions in the chat because I had made quite a list of questions that I'm hoping to answer that we probably won't get to as many of while you guys were speaking. First, a couple just really little ones that are to do some clarifying. How are you guys defining a mid-sized farm?
We're not. It's defined by the community. Really, it could be an urban lot to it could be, a 100 acres, 200 acres. Really, for us, it has to be viable for food production and livelihood.
So I understood that question differently. I think that what Ian just shared is how we are deciding what farmland to go after in moving it into a farmland commons and what land donations to accept. In that way, the mid-sized farm, the stat around 37 mid-sized farms closing, that's defined by the USDA, and that's how they define farmland in those ways, and that was a USDA stat.
And the USDA is by a gross income, and I think it's maybe 250 to 500,000. It's something in that range. My numbers might be off a little bit, but it's a gross income right in that range.
Yeah, that was why one of those clarifying asks, are you using the income range, which is common in USDA, or the physical sort of size of farms? And what happens at the end of a 99-year lease?
So 99 years is because that's as long as most states will allow. So state to state laws differ, and most states allow a 99-year lease, and that's what we advocate for, is whatever the longest term allowed is. And so really that's a statement in this land is yours as much as it can be yours. In other states, for instance, Wisconsin, they have limits to how long agriculture leases can be. And so in some states, it can only be 15 years. And in those cases, we're looking at creative ways to lengthen that long-term secure tenure. So that could either be through a life estate, meaning that that person has ownership of the right to live and maintain and operate that land tied to their life, or a rolling lease, or, a renewing after that term, and that's written in and spoken to in that way. It really is dependent on state law.
There was a farmer here in Washtenaw County who donated his farm to the county Parks and Recreation Department for it to be used and kind of preserved as farmland. And farmland education and that kind of thing. And his agreement was that the county Parks and Recreation Department, while he was alive, he and his sister could continue living there, and they would do the maintenance. And he did that donation, I think, long about, I don't know, maybe he was 88 and he lived till 102. And the county put a lot of money into a lot of things before they had the opportunity to do more with it. But yay, farmers, right? Two things without maybe getting into the weeds. If there's any highlights, you started talking about the difference at states around length of agricultural leases. Are there other things, given that you're working under a 501, which is a federal designation, other variations at states that have come up in state law and jurisdiction that have been big, barriers or differences? Again, without getting into the weeds. And then a related question about sort of the legal structure is, where did this designation come from? I've read that it's pension funds and governments and nonprofits, and it's for real estate. So where else is it used? Where did it come from? And who else has borrowed it or used it for this sort of agricultural purpose like you're using?
Yeah, so really, state to state, there's quite a few differences, that gets into the weeds quickly, but just on a surface level, like there's corporate farm laws in a number of upper Midwest states that nonprofits are corporations, so it limits their ability to own farmland. There's, west of the Mississippi, water and natural resource rights are separated from land rights. So they're not owned in the same structure as they are east of the Mississippi. So there's quite a few differences state to state, more than that too, but those are some kind of broad level of things. But really, like anywhere we work, we need like local legal counsel to advise on how this model changes because of that.
Mm-hmm. And what about where this sort of model was adapted from if it wasn't originally used? Who else uses
Totally.
this
Yeah.
501
So
51625 in particular?
yeah, well, so and so the 501(c)(2) exists from like I think it's 1914, and then the 501(c)(25) came to be in 1984, I think. I might be a year or two off. But so, created by IRS as a type of 501(c) model, and really their 501(c)(25) is used in a lot of cases we've seen by healthcare organizations, religious organizations, and yeah, like pension investment fund type entities. And we don't know the primary reasons for. Like we could guess some of them, as Christina named, like there's some liability protection from one entity to the next, and there's some flexibility that the C2 or the C25 are not public charities in the way that a C3 is. So there's more latitude in how they limit access or use or operations than is allowed for a C3. So that plays out in some ways, but we don't know direct motivation for these other industries to use them.
But no, they're not being used for agriculture or these purposes. I mean, that is what is exciting and creative and innovative of this is like using existing legal structures and new ways that they haven't been used before to address things that they haven't been used to address. Like so in every state we work, we have to use in-state attorneys, and different examples that we've heard of for the C25 have to do typically with C3s, like nonprofits that have to create another nonprofit arm of their existing entity to do this other thing, and then have to create another nonprofit arm to do this other thing, but then they all need to co-own land, but they're all under the same umbrella. Like that sort of example, which makes sense when you know.
Well, big applause to you for using existing tax code for a really important different thing. I mean, I think that's a huge innovation from you. So someone asked about the use of conservation easements, where the right to develop land is held by a nonprofit or local government, but land is still purchased for farming. Does this lower the price of the farmland? So that's the question. But I'd like you to also speak to the broader connection and how you're seeing this model is being received by existing land trusts, other existing kind of models as you were describing in the beginning.
Yeah, so conservation easements, right, are kind of we touched upon, but they're separating out some certain legal rights and protecting the land in that way. So in some cases, they are going to lower the value of that land, but not in all cases. So in cases where there's a market for that hobby farm or kind of farm-like estate that's not in production, say, like non-farming buyers who want to buy farms, like it doesn't lower the price much at all. So some states, primarily New England, California, have started to use this option to purchase at agricultural value that, in addition to the conservation easement, layers on additional restrictions that get at that market value. So they limit it to affordable for farmers. Farmers aren't one block though, right? So what's affordable for a farm industry corporation is far different than what's affordable for new and beginning farmer, right? But they're not into that nuanced of different types of farmer. It's just like what is affordable in a farm-based market as opposed to an open market. So yeah, some cases it can lower value, but less and less is that a reality around the country of conservation easement lowering the value. But conservation easements can work with this model. They're protecting the land, and a conservation easement, is permanent on the land. So some farms we work with have conservation easements already. Some have conservation easements added in the process of our work. Some we would add in the future as is possible. Conservation land trusts are not equitably positioned around the country, though. So some parts of the country have far more than other parts. So it's very prevalent for a lot of farmland in parts of the country to have conservation easements, not in other parts of the country. So it really differs in those ways, but they can be part of the model. It can work in that way. But really, for us, the model, and to that other part of the question, is this model directly addresses the ownership. So the only way a 501c2 or a C25 can exist is if they own real estate. So they can't operate to hold conservation easements. They can't operate to like hold a lease. Like they need to own the title to the real property interest in something. So it can't be held by some other party, but any party could be the donor or the discounted seller of land in. So it could be individual, it could be county, it could be public or private ownership that transitions land into this structure, but then the real estate has to be held in this structure.
Yeah, I think too, just to add that that conservation easement, even in the cases where it is bringing down the value of land, yes, it is, but it's still very unaffordable to most farmers who are just growing vegetables and food for their communities. In fact, I've heard conservation attorneys say we are losing farmland to conservation easements. Like we are losing farmland because of this, because then those hobby farmers or like wealthy people who just want more lawn space and privacy are the ones who have better access to that. But even in the cases where they are lowering the value and making it more accessible to farmers, that's only for one generation. Like farmland prices are still appreciating over 40% per decade. Like it's just going to keep rising and it will become unaffordable very quickly for that next time that land transition. So solving the problem just for this next transition is no longer enough. We need to be thinking longer term than that. And then to your question about how conservation land trusts in general are reacting to this model, I think the land trust movement is grappling with questions around how do we address affordability? How do we address working lands? How do we address housing? And a lot of that is coming from the fact that they're a train that has a lot of force behind it, and it's very hard to change course at this point, because they're doing what they've been doing for decades now, and it's difficult to transition into thinking different ways or doing different things. And a very large part of that is because of how their funding comes to them and what it is required for them to do with it. And so conservation land trusts get most of their funding for conservation easements from federal tax dollars that are not available. That same money is not available for the work that we do or for community land trusts. And so for them, a lot of times they're very interested in this model. They're very supportive of it. They totally see the need. They want to get involved, but it's a question around funding. Like that's not what their funding is supposed to be used for, and that's not what they have funding for.
When someone asks about farmers and who is considered a farmer in this, and are farm workers, are gardeners? They sort of ask about the range of farmers in these structures, maybe in the example in your community, in your different kind of communities of folks.
Yeah, we do not have that defined. In fact, I feel like we're constantly redefining what it means to be a farmer, because we certainly are not trying to support and advocate for farmers who are large scale monocrop farmers growing a bunch of corn and soy. Like we are talking about people who are growing food for their communities. And that's what we mean when we say farmer, is people who are growing food for themselves and their local communities.
And what about getting out? Someone asked a question about can property ever be removed from the trust, from the commons or the trust? They asked about the trust, but can property ever be removed? And then I'm curious also about, we know that some people try farming and then they decide it's not for them because it's really hard. What happens when the person wants wants to get out or wants to be responsible for less, or those sort of realities. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, totally. So land coming into this structure in our work stays in this structure. A big reason for doing this is to decommodify land, to change our relationship to land from something that's this market-based asset. So we're not doing something to allow it to go back into the market and be an asset. We're doing something for permanent change in how land is held. So, in the legal structure, a C2 or a C25, land could come and go, and someone could create it for that. It's a lot of work and costs to create and do that to allow land to come out. But in our work, land stays in the structure. So that's the land side of things. The lease farmer side of things, really, that's a big reason for this structure is that, farming, like so many other businesses, like has a high failure rate in the first handful of years. Like most people are not who start farming are not farming after year 5 or year 10. That's the reality across the country. And so instead of that farmer deciding it doesn't work for, there's many reasons why it doesn't work for people, and that's perfectly justified and fine. But instead of the farmer deciding it doesn't work, jeopardizing the land and the future of that, this just means that the farmer decides they're exiting their lease. Like maybe they find someone new to take over their lease, maybe they don't, and then the Farmland Commons has to find a new leaseholder. But the farm itself is staying for the same goals that it started with of regenerative food production and understanding that, you know, people's life and farm businesses are far shorter than the life of land, right? So land being held in something, nonprofits are some of the most durable, long-standing legal structures we have in this country as far as length of time. So matching land, which we need to have a much longer view than we do now with nonprofits that have one of the, historically durable, long-standing life to them allows for land to be held in something that's longer than people's life, farm business life, or the reasons that people leave farming early.
Right.
And really, like farms are not sustainable in many cases because the money can't work, but we're taking out the largest money hurdle, which is the cost of land, So like helping farms become economically viable by removing that burden of debt through a mortgage or high lease rate is very helpful in being able to maintain that economic viability for the farm.
Right. And of course, we're now over time because I just couldn't stop asking questions, and I'm going to ask one more. And some students might drop off because technically we end at 7:50, but your loss, students who've missed this last one. There are a couple of questions about kind of the path to doing this work, career and job opportunities, and what they might look like in this space, how people can get involved, as well as how you knew you wanted to do this type of work. You was shared a little in your intros, but can you speak about that as our last set of questions?
Yeah, I'm sure we both could speak about that. Like in brief, like we are both people that created the jobs we have and have created the life path we have, and really more and more because of our economy and the way that, whether it's the gig economy that fractured like career security or it's AI now, like it's forcing people to be creators and to create their own path far more and will continue on that way into the future. So encourage people to find your passion and then learn and develop experience in that passion enough to be able to create your own future, your own job in that. So that's part of it. The other one thing I'd say is that, this model that we're doing, and as we framed it, it kind of learns from, borrows from, and evolves beyond land trust work. So there are thousands of land trusts that exist across the country who a number of them are getting exposed to this and getting interest. Like I would suggest that over the years to come, land trusts, many of them conservation wise and community wise, will need to pivot or evolve in some ways towards addressing the ownership stake. Like, even if it's not for our work, many conservation land trusts that protected the land are now faced with landowners who are aging out and passing on, and that question of who's going to own the land now because of this transition is before them. So they're recognizing the need to address that ownership reality, and many community land trusts are needing to grow beyond their small community, say. So there will be a lot, there has been, and there will continue to be a lot of evolution in the land trust world, and there'll be need for more jobs, more people with this type of passion for land justice and direct ways to impact ownership, equity, and tenure to come on to existing land trusts to carry forward that work.
Mhm.
That was a great response.
The
Yeah,
last
I'm
one,
gonna,
Lisa.
I mean, I'm gonna say, like, if you're willing to fundraise for your own position, then you can have any job you want. I mean, that's like, you can work anywhere you want if you're willing to fundraise for it. And that's, I think, anyone who works at a nonprofit, like, we are constantly fundraising to pay for ourselves to be able to do the work that we want to do. And that, I think when people ask this sort of question, they are really wanting fulfilling work. Like, they want to do something that's meaningful and is doing a positive impact. And like, for jobs like that, you're gonna have to fundraise for your own salary.
I hear you. I have done that my entire career. And then I thought, oh, I now, as of January, started at University of Michigan, someone else is paying my paycheck, but a big part of my role is then also to do fundraising.
Right.
So here we are. I can't get away from that. Thank you guys so much. So interesting. I loved hearing you, and we'll get some great feedback from the students throughout the rest of the week. So we'll go through a couple just really quick last slides about next week, but I'm really
Well, thank
excited.
you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Like, thank you so much for having us. And thank you, Julius, for inviting us and making this connection. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. So, yeah, I'm excited to watch watch this model and this work evolve, and really excited that we have an example growing in Michigan right now. I think that's going to be great because that makes it that much more easy to do that. And I already have ideas in my head of how some local adaptation might happen. So more on that in the future. A couple just last things. Dining has summer internships for students in sustainability. We've been pushing in the newsletter in the last couple of weeks in class this national series from the North American Food System Network, which if you're graduating and going into food systems, this is a great professional network for you to, organization network for you to join. And this is actually all about lots of different kinds of opportunities in the food system if you are a new career seeker. Couple things coming up: Campus Farm, plant sale, Thursday, April 16th, Friday, April 17th, in Ingalls Mall, so Central Campus. Come get ready to buy all your plants. They are really like beautifully grown plants. And sustainability coffee chats are coming up from the Student Sustainability Coalition. I just actually got to tour the Palmer Commons where Rooting for Change, the cafe, is for those coffee chats, and the full licensed commercial kitchen that is usable by student groups, FYI, for projects and things. Like, it was a full restaurant kitchen. So hot tip, if you're a student looking for a place to engage with, I can connect you there. Reminder about following our social media, but you can look in the newsletter around that. And then Fast Food for Thought next week. Remember to RSVP so we make sure to have a seat for you. And we are excited to have all of these speakers from so many different departments talk about food in lots of different ways in very short form, each of them. So thank you guys so much this evening. We are looking forward to learning more. And as a reminder for everyone, in our newsletter that goes out on Fridays to about 3,500 people, we do a little really short recap and a link to the video. So you get ready to think about who you want to share this with. And we've taken notes during your presentation. And so beyond your linking to your website, we'll link to some of the other things that that you shared as well, just as resources for our students and the community and all the other folks who read our newsletter. So thanks everyone so much, and have a great night.